Excellence in our industry comes from quality teams creating quality products. In an industry that's constantly evolving, it's your unwavering grit, determination, and passion that drives innovation and elevates standards to new heights. As brewers ourselves, we know what that passion looks like. It's the drive to create something exceptional, fueled by dedication and love for the craft. As a stainless steel equipment manufacturer for over 10 years, ABS Commercial provides a full consultative approach to our customers, from consultation and design to installation and ongoing care and maintenance. Whether you're in planning, just getting started, or looking to expand, we're here to support your growth and your success. Thank you for choosing ABS Commercial as your trusted partner.
All right, great. Well, I think we are going live and wanted to welcome and thank everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Clayson. I am the founder of the Beverage Federation. The Beverage Federation is a group purchasing organization designed to facilitate business between breweries and supply partners. As a procurement specialist, we typically sit in between partners and owners discussing how best to transact large and small orders. It's with that in mind that brings us to our topic today, how to measure successful supplier relationships. Why do some of these relationships work and others don't? So I wanted to say thank you to Andrew and the CBP team for putting these events on. They're really a great opportunity for the industry to share best practices. We'll get into a little bit of our agenda here for today and jump in. We're going to speak with you a little bit, do some brief introductions of our panelists, and then dive right into our content, which is discussing what makes a good partner, what are some lessons learned, are there any resources or recommendations from our experts, and then we'll get into some Q&A. But as you go, we have a chat feature, so don't wait till the end to put that Q&A parts in there. If you enter them in, it might be very topical, and we'll have our team dive into it right then and there, or it might make a better fit to wait till the end. But don't wait, we'll write it down, and we'll make sure we get to the questions, because that's what we're here for. So with that, I wanted to introduce our panel, and I will start off with Matt Kahn, who is the president of Big Ditch Brewing in Buffalo, New York. I want to thank Matt for joining us today. And as we go over to Kevin Wright, who is the co-founder and head brewer at Third Space Brewing. Kevin is the not only co-founder, starter of that, as well as located with their brewery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And then to round things out for a discussion around partnerships, not only do we have our brewery experts, but also wanted to bring in a supply partner expert. And I want to thank Eric Gruner for joining us today. Eric is the president at Hank's Craft AJS Tap Handles in Random Lake, Wisconsin. So thank you guys all for joining, and we'll have a good discussion, I think, about partnership. Which brings us to the topic today and the challenge that we thought would be very timely as we talk a little bit about the industry. And at the end of the day, the premise we have is that good partners are good for business. I think we can all recognize sometimes we have that partner that helps make life easier. They help with either save you time or money or both. And there's someone there that really is tied to your success. And that's really a value to it. But that's not always the case with different partnerships. So what makes those relationships work? And then the converse, how do you measure those partnerships? And how do you avoid the ones that we all know can be costly? That was really the premise for this afternoon. And because it's such a critical time, but it's usually not a topic that's discussed. And we wanted to start to open that up here a little bit for the group. So with that, guys, I will officially talk a lot less going forward and start to turn things over to you guys. And I wanted to start off with just a framework question, really, from each of you, an understanding of what makes a good partner. And perhaps, Matt, you're top of my screen, and we could start there with you. Maybe you could kick things off with a little bit on what makes a good partner for you, and then we'll go around the horn a little bit.
Sure. As I thought about this topic, there were just a couple things that kept coming back in terms of what we value in terms of supplier relationships. And the first is really just value. It's how we um, even treat ourselves. So value to us means a combination of price and quality. It's not just price alone. And it's certain, it's not always quality alone too. Who is providing really, a good price for the quality we're looking for. So that's sort of where it starts. You sort of need to have both of those fit, but beyond that, then it really goes to communication. Our best suppliers, we have good communications with. They're responsive to our needs, to questions we have, technical issues. They help us solve problems. That's where I'd start with, is starting with value and then moving into really good communications.
That's great. That's great. Well, Kevin, let's continue on with feedback from a brewery perspective here. What about you? What makes that good partner?
I mean, I think building on everything Matt said, another key thing for me is somebody who really understands our business and understands how it works. There are so many different brewery models out there, and everybody, we're all trying to achieve similar things, but we all have different ways that we achieve those, and different scope and different resources and abilities. And so, sometimes you'll talk to a supplier and you can tell when they're giving you kind of the canned pitch that they give to everybody, versus, really asking the questions to understand how they can best serve your own unique individual needs. So I always try to ask those questions. I always try to listen for people that are trying to get that out of me.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense to try to that are actually, just not to have getting off the call from the last different beverage provider and just repeating that, so I can understand that. And so, Eric, I'm really looking forward to the dynamic here. Usually these conversations, I think, happen with, I'm talking to either breweries and we're having what might sometimes be a one-sided conversation. And then I'm talking to supply partners, and and it's, the goal of this was kind of what do breweries think, but then also supply partners, same question to you, Eric, as far as what do you define as a good partner?
Yeah, I think that Kevin's right on with, do you know anything about my business? And that's a big approach, because, from, at least from our perspective, right, if we're going to be involved in the marketing side of things, have you been to my brewery? Have you been to my website? Have you tried my beer? Do you even know what it is that I'm trying to accomplish? And I think having those conversations is really what starts the partnership. But if I were to look at one key aspect, and it takes a lot to get there, but the one key aspect to me that makes a good supplier partner, or a partnership in general, is building the trust. And that takes some time, but the trust, really a lot of the trust comes from having open and honest two-way communication, right? And that takes a little bit of time to get into, unfortunately, sometimes. But I think that if you have that trust in your suppliers, and we have that trust in the breweries, things move so much faster, right? And when you have that trust and you're really leaning on someone to be an expert or be a partner or really help you out or really understand your business, it should run much more smoothly. So I think that that's the basis of what I try to really accomplish the most with the brewery partners that we work with.
That makes sense. That's great, guys. That's really gives us a framework, right, from what that can operate from. I'm also curious too, is taking a step back, and I know from talking to you guys that all of you have been in the industry for longer than 24 months, right? I talked to some people who, I call it the hair on fire stage. I mean, they are new and they're drinking for the fire hose, but then talking to individuals who have been in the industry more, I'm more curious about attaching a little bit of trends, right? And as it relates to partnerships, I'm curious from, again, maybe the loop back around, Matt, to start with you. Have you noticed changes over the last few years, 4 or 5, 6 years, industry changes when you think about good partners or partners in general? And then I'd broaden that to, is there a good trend we're talking partnerships, or is that perhaps something there's a concern there?
I don't think there's been too much of a change, but I will say that, coming out of 2020 during COVID and going through 2021 with supply chain issues and then inflation, I mean, by 2022, we were sort of, and maybe beginning of 2023, we were really looking at all of our supplier partners to make sure we were getting consistent performance out of all of them. And things, did change. We did actually want to making a bunch of changes out of that. We had some suppliers that were, really out of control with, pricing changes and very little notification. We had some, again, with just, poor delivery schedules. In some cases, we even had, I think anybody that's been in this for a little while knows about problems that with cans. Cans were a huge problem, really, for just about everybody for several years. So we had to take a look at all of that to make sure we were really doing the right thing. And, I would encourage that out of everyone is, even when you've got your good, strong relationships, still do your due diligence to make sure you're getting, the best, again, what I say, value out of your vendor. Don't ever take for granted that, that's definitely happening. And, certainly over the last few years, we had to take a look at that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have a can story and a COVID can story, right? So, and all that, but it's an interesting time that a lot of you guys went through, obviously just COVID in general and what that did with, I'm sure, some of the partnerships and on both ends of the spectrum. Kevin, kind of continuing with breweries, any trends, over the last few years regarding partnerships, either good or bad, that you've been noticing or having to deal with?
I don't know if I'd say good or bad, but what I've seen is in certain supply areas of the industry, like a consolidation of the amount of people available that are doing something. And I think that's cans. We saw that big time in terms of who you get cans from for a while. But then in other areas, you're seeing more newcomers coming in. And one area I can think of where I see new ones a lot is hop suppliers, where there's new groups getting involved in whether they've got grower relationships or they're brokering for other people. But I'm seeing more of those. And so, both sides of those kind of present different challenges. So you got to be, kind of understanding, how you're vetting people when whether they're brand new or whether, the people you used to use are no longer in business. So just knowing that, suppliers are a dynamic thing and knowing where different areas are going.
Absolutely. Eric, I'm curious. Same question on the other side of the table. Sometimes of what are some of the things you've been noticing over the last few years from either partnership or supply partner side of things?
Yeah, I think that the speed at which things are happening, right? So, as Matt kind of talked about coming off of 2020, everybody was doing more with less, right? We all had to kind of shrink a little bit of some of that. So I think that people got more efficient, right? Ourselves, including, I think the manufacturers, we got more efficient as well. So just trying to figure out how to respond faster and do more with less. I think that the conversation that we're having with end users, we're making faster decisions on a lot of things because there's so much more that the breweries have to be cognizant of and take care of and doing all that stuff. But, I also agree. Taking that pulse on your suppliers, I think is critical. I think you have to do that. And here, look at it a couple of ways. Are even the ones that you have longstanding relationships, are they taking care of you? Are they adding that value? Do they proactively reach out to you to say, how are things going? What can we be doing different? Are there things that you're working on? Are they proactively looking to help your business, your suppliers looking to help your business? Or are they just waiting for you to call them to spend more money? And that's not really, it's not good. So I would tell you, even from a supplier's perspective, put us in check, put anybody in check, just to make sure that they are adding something. And I think that as the industry changes and moves forward, that's going to be a critical piece of what we all need to do going forward, making sure that we're with the right people. And hey, sometimes you are, right? You find out, you know what, I'm doing the right things. This is working for me, and that's okay too. But I think that it's smart to be able to take that pulse.
No, I agree. I think it's interesting, Eric. You taking an approach of these are some of the questions that a supply partner should be calling and asking, knowing your industry, right? Knowing that calling and saying of what can I do to help. I don't know how often I've heard that, right? I hear a lot about the I'm just calling to check in. How are things going? And you're like, whether taking that next step and saying something like, what can I do to help, or what could we do to improve, that it would be a great,
Or seeing what do they have going on? What do you have going on right now? Are you planning something new? Are you planning a new launch? Getting out ahead of it so we are part of what's happening. Hey, we're all follow the social medias. We see what's on their websites. If you're planning a new beer release, if we can help from a supplier standpoint to get out in front of some of that stuff, I just think that that's important. And are all of your suppliers as well, our suppliers and our relationships, we should be doing that.
I was going to add on there too. I think some of our better suppliers will ask us even for forecasts. What do you think is going to happen next year? Let me plan for your success. Or, I think that's it's a good idea. It doesn't take too much work. It shows that they're thinking about and care about what we're doing, and makes us think a little bit about what, our needs even going forward. So I think that's always a good discussion.
It's great, Matt. And I tell you, if you can give that information and hold the supplier accountable to it too, right? So if someone's calling and saying, hey, give me the forecast and I'll buy ahead, or I'll lock in pricing, or then make sure that they do that. And I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to, that's that good communication both ways that should be happening.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about that for you guys, especially, Kevin and Matt, about that. Do you ever feel like when you were first starting off that you held that information back a little bit? It was like, listen, I don't know if I want to share that with you in March, and I don't think I need something from it until July. So I'll call you in July with that. Is that how you've always operated, that if someone's asked me for forecasts and I think I can get it to you and you can be proactive, that I don't know, does that make sense? That I feel like some brewers might operate that, like I keep that close to my vest just until I think I need to tell you.
I think some people may operate that way, but for me, when we were beginning, the answer was, I have no freaking clue how much we're going to need, in 2 months. We were just starting up. It was, like you said, drinking from a fire hose. So the thought of like putting together any kind of reliable forecast at that point was just not something I was able to do. I could tell you what I was going to do next week, but to tell you what I was going to do in a few months was hard. So as we got going, and as we got, more of our business under our feet, then I've always tried to be as open as I can with suppliers about that kind of thing, because it's never going to hurt you. Nobody's going to use that information against you necessarily, to be more communicative. But yeah, it's hard sometimes. Even now, it's hard to predict. We got to sign hop contracts a year out, and I'm like, I don't know. I think we'll do this, but it's still hard to know exactly what you're going to need.
Yeah. Matt, what about you?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with everything Kevin just said. It's never been like we're afraid to share information. It's more like we don't know how good it is. So, and the earlier it's been, probably the worse that guess would have been. So, but I wouldn't discourage any brewery from trying to share that information with a somewhat trusted supplier, to make sure you're both your supplier, your success should be their success, and so on and so forth. It's a partnership. Yeah. So any intelligence that you have that can make them more successful for you, you should share. That's what we've tried to do. That's great.
Well, I wanted to round out this partnership discussion on just defining it, and there's some elements of this as you guys were talking. Everyone was kind of mentioning this. Is there, Matt? I'll kind of start with you again, because you made reference to, especially post-COVID, taking a look at your partner network, and do you go so far as to have metrics for them or grading? I mean, how do you kind of touch that and say these are some that you mentioned, some that were pricing, availability? How do you go about quantifying some of that partner relationship?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We don't do that right now. We don't have a metric for suppliers, so it's a little bit just, how things feel. Again, some combination between quality, pricing. Is there something we think we can get better? Whether it be one of those things. I will say, previously to me working in the brewing industry, when I worked at a place large enough for a place that might have a supplier quality department or even a purchasing department, it was known that you would have a supplier scorecard. So the scorecard would be, again, lead time, orders arriving on time. How does the pricing compare? Do they have a technical service department? Is there a specification? Things like that. All those things help. So while we don't do those things, I think that's a good baseline for anybody who's really trying to hone in on, who's performing well for them. Write it down, score it, and take a look at who your best suppliers are.
Eric, I'm going to go down the screen here. You're next in my queue. I want to kind of get the other insight for your supply partners or just experience to that same thing. Is there an evaluation, a qualification of putting numbers to what that good partner we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, we measure it by repeat business. Have we earned the business every time? And we look at the repeat customer. How often are they ordering? And then, do we have a relationship, or are we one of, right? Are we just one of the places that you buy a good or service from, or are we the place that you buy it from, right? Did we create that relationship where it's ongoing, where, our team is talking with your team on a regular basis and looking ahead, looking to the future? Did we help? Did we help you achieve those goals? Did we help you achieve what it was that you wanted when you called us as a supplier? And that's how we measure it. So if we get the repeat business back, and it's not even just the business, it's if we're reaching out and having conversations, are we open to continuing conversations about what's going on down the road? Or is it, hey, stay over there for a while until we need you next? Then I feel like we haven't created that value enough that we're we have that partnership relationship. And it's more that we're just a manufacturer at that point. And that means that from a supplier, we need to do a little bit more work.
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
So, we don't scorecard them or anything like that, but I over the years, we've moved away from certain suppliers because we didn't like working with them for whatever reason. And we've moved towards certain suppliers. So it's almost like keep like a kind of a mental note of those things, and if we're not happy with something, we move on. But I think for us, the key is defining what the value is that you're looking to get, and that's sometimes going to be different. When you're talking about certain items, you may just care about price and delivery, or certain things you really have to get a specific quality parameter that you're trying to hit. I use the example of like case trays. So like we've been with our same supplier for case trays forever. And it's because I know I can place an order today. It's going to be at my door tomorrow, and they have a fair price. And I really value that. And, I've had people come in who are like, oh, I can save you, 10 cents a tray on your trays. And I'm like, the value to me over the course of a year to like try to vet a new partner to save 10 cents, it might amount to a couple $100 this year. It's not worth that to me to switch. So it's defining the values, and then we whittle out the ones that we don't like working with. Yeah.
I think your example there, Kevin, is one that I hear variations of, and sometimes it goes where I don't have it written down why they're that trusted advisor. What makes that problematic if it's not written down sometimes, or they haven't thought about it. To your point, there's always someone knocking on the door saying, I can come in a nickel lower, and to say it isn't just about price. Your example said, they have competitive price, but then it's turnaround time, lead time, things. The other thing that has value, I know if I place my order, it's going to show up. I don't have to, worry about that and quality and all the things that come to it. So, I sometimes hear that on the flip end of that, though, that you mentioned leaving some partners, where a brewery might say, that I use so and so, I'm not exactly happy, but what are you going to do? And I don't know if they've gone through an exercise to say, like, besides being upset with them constantly or not trusting that it's going to get there quality, how much time and money is that actually costing us to not explore someone else? Just some of the differences here, that sometimes it helps when you get that knock on the door with someone who's just going to talk to you about price. So yeah, this kind of helps. I think you guys, I appreciate this, kind of frame out the discussion of, okay, so what if that is our partners? I'm going to move to, the next thing here that we're going to talk about, and just frame it up here to lessons learned. And just to go to we talked a little bit about, what the partnership network looks like, who, how you guys have communicated with them. I'm curious to get into things that would help people listening or other breweries, but things from your perspective, that what have been some lessons learned that helped your brewery over the last couple of years, and just in partnerships in general. And I'll just give you a tease on what some of the other questions are. Is if you jump into it, it's more easier to anecdotally talk about something that was good or bad. But maybe if we start off and kind of reverse things a little bit, Kevin, you want to touch on a little bit if you have any examples of things you've learned about partnership?
Yeah, I think one of the big things we learned is a couple of years ago we really got focused on our the financial side of the business, and really digging into cost of goods sold and expenses, and really started bucketing, like, okay, where are we spending the majority of our money on COGS? And once we identified that, it's like, okay, these are where we should be putting our effort in. If we're spending 30% of our annual COGS budget on cans, that's really where we should be focusing, trying to find those great partners and find those savings. So that's something. And then mistakes made. Did you ask that too, I think?
Well, I'm going to get to that one. Right. So I'll let you. Yeah, you jumped right to it, and I kind of led you there. But I wanted to hear, Matt and Eric, and Matt, we'll go Matt, and then Eric, we'll jump to you. Just starting with exactly like Kevin said, maybe just a lesson that's been learned as it relates to partners, and it's helped your business. Kevin was talking about narrowing in on finances. Matt,
what I was going to share was that, and this is probably not a super mystery to most of the folks that might be listening to this, but the brewing industry is so collaborative. It's pretty rare where you've got an industry that you have so many different people you can touch base with that would even participate in something like this, and forums and this sort of thing. It's just other people that have been through it. So don't be afraid to, ask some of the folks in your community who they're working with and what works. We've learned from that. We've had people ask us. We've had people share contacts, at least to get you started. And then you get to hear some of the good and bad from it. So it helps you weed through a little bit of it before you learn it on, the hard way yourself. So I'd say we found some of our better suppliers. And maybe avoided a few missteps. Just ask it around a little bit.
I've heard the power of the hive mind of throwing it out there to a good group or a brewery down the street. You are right. I have not been a part of an industry as collaborative as this, where someone's happy to get a text or an email from someone in the industry and ask her a couple of questions. So that's great to hear. Eric, taking things a little variation on that for lessons learned that's for partnership that's helped your business over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that as much as I'd like to say yes to everything, right, from a supplier standpoint, I think that asking the right pointed questions and pushing back a little bit if it doesn't seem right, at least from like a custom manufacturing. And I think that those are some lessons that we had learned, that if something doesn't look right, or I think it's going to fail down the road, and I know it's a great design, or I know this is the direction that you want to go, I think having a little bit more of a direct conversation. And again, all this comes back to, have you built enough trust to be able to believe in your suppliers who are talking to you about these things? But if you're making something, just making sure that it's going to work. And if there's a design flaw, or if there's a flaw in the timing that you're looking for, being able to have that conversation boldly instead of just saying yes and trying to figure it out. I think those are the mistakes that from a supplier standpoint, too often we see in the industry, that we have to be, from all of your suppliers, we need to be better at just having honest and bold conversations with each other about what those expectations are. And I think that's a big learning curve.
That's another good one. Well, guys, what I'm going to do just as we go along here, I'm going to actually roll out the next two and let you guys choose a little bit, because there's some overlapping themes in this here when we talk lessons learned. And Kevin, this is where I was leading and getting a little ahead of myself here. But, I always find that when I'm talking to someone, they do want to share sometimes, this happened and we were trying to do this event and this showed up right at the nick of the time and it went on and Ozzy went on and had a great show. And there's just this like really great example of where, something went well. Feel free to share that. I don't want it to be a Monday of negativity, but I'm also curious though, if there's something, you kind of started to talk about this, Eric, on speak up if you've got that like gut feeling that something's going off of. Maybe it's a partnership, or maybe it's a time where, we don't do that anymore. We don't go local with that provider because of this happened, or we don't work with that. That was our lessons learned to our team that we had to apply. And you can learn as much from sometimes a failure as you can from a success story. So either one of those, from, either once you had those experience, my other part of that is kind of a two-part is, how do you communicate that with your internal organization so that when you're on vacation, someone doesn't call up that supplier that was blacklisted, whatever that is, or they understand the reasoning, the business reasoning, right? It wasn't just because we just don't like, so-and-so's, mustache that he was growing in November. Like there's a reason behind why we don't do business with that. And I'm just curious if those are interrelated a little bit on, lessons learned and then how that makes its way to your team. So Matt, I'll again, top of the deck here, and you can start off if, take that any direction you want with some example or communication.
Sure. Maybe I'll probably go back to cans again. That one hurt a little bit. So we actually had a supplier we had worked with for over 4 straight years, maybe 5 straight years, that we were placing consistent orders with. We saw growth with, and then one day we got a phone call and all of our orders were canceled. We did not have a contract with them, and that I think was a mistake, something that we didn't foresee. But that was sort of shocking and upsetting. And so I think since then, what we've tried to do is sort of establish, and I think this is a very good practice, establish primary and secondary supplies. So for every material, have a primary supplier and then a backup in case things go south or something goes wrong. Even when stuff is contracted, you just never know what's going to happen. Obviously, hard to foresee everything that happened a few years ago. But, that was one that really hurt and very painful. We weren't alone in that. But I think, a lot of lessons learned coming out of that. So primary and secondary supplier, I would advise for every one of your, key ingredients, materials, malt, hops, packaging.
Yeah. And did that approach come out of that experience with the cans, or was that part of that COVID, the necessity of a supply chain that was a deeper bench, or both?
Well, I think the can supply chain was hurt due to COVID. That started that. And then a lot of changes were made out of that just as a reaction to that, but it affected, I feel like everybody in our industry to some degree. But it was a weakness of ours that we, probably should have addressed earlier, was making sure that, hey, we can't count on every supplier relationship necessarily to work every single time. And some things you can get away with, right? So even for the trays that Kevin mentioned, there are other folks that maybe have trays. There's ways to maybe get a few pretty quick, right? But other things, like we've got printed cans. So these are plates. This is not something you can just turn around, stock item that people have on a week or two's notice. We needed months to have that done. So if there's something like that, particularly if it's something proprietary to you, you should have a backup. So that was hope that answered your question there, but a little bit of everything happened there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Kevin, do you want to stay with let's stay with breweries, and then we'll round it out with Eric here. Any for those last two, wherever direction you want to take it.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on the contracting. So I mean, we saw the same thing that Matt did. Cans might even been the same supplier, but so now we have supply contracts for our major things, our cans, our malt, and our hops. So if there are things that are specific to you that you need, that you can't live without, that you can't go borrow, a couple cases from the guys down the street. I highly encourage contracting, especially hops is one that's a hot topic these days. There's going to be some shakeups in the hop market. So if you are using large quantities of certain varieties and you aren't contracting, like look at that. On the flip side of contracting, make sure you read them carefully and know what you're signing. So we signed a CO2 supply contract right when we opened, and one of the last things on my mind when we were opening the brewery is like, who are going to get our CO2 supply from? So we got the contract. We looked over, it looked fine, but it was from one of the real large suppliers, and it turned out to be a real predatory contract. And so what happened with that is we had, they offered us a great price at the beginning, and it looked awesome. And that price went up, by 10 to 30% every year for the duration of the contract. And when we outgrew their equipment, because we grew and we outgrew what we had, we got a bigger piece of equipment from them, that automatically reset our contract for 5 more years. Was in the fine print. And so this ended up being about a 7-year CO2 contract. And by the end, we were paying like exorbitant prices, way above market price. And it was just, hurting us from a financial standpoint. So make sure, you get contracts in place for things that you need, but then read the fine details of those. Something like that, I'd recommend, if you don't have somebody who's really good at contract reading, find, somebody that you trust that will do that for you, and make sure the contracts you sign are good for both sides.
Yeah, that's a good point. Eric, a little different take there for for partnerships and communication to your internal team.
The thing is, it's real similar, because I think that having backup suppliers on everything is great. It's a key thing to have. And I'll piggyback on, we did the same thing when we ran into all of the supply chain issues, because we'll buy, we manufacture everything here out of Random Lake, right? But we have to buy some of the ferrules or the screws or the mounting posts or all these, and we get them from wherever. We get them all over the world, right? So when we were in the same situation, being going to be late with product coming out because we were waiting for a ship to come in, that there was 700 of them parked in a dock somewhere, we decided that wasn't going to happen any longer either. So, made the adjustment to say, okay, we're not only going to find things domestically, but find things locally. We've got a whole kinds of machine shops and things that, just right around the Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois area. So just started getting local suppliers for everything that we would need, so that the customers aren't disappointed in the end, because we're sitting here saying, well, your handles are going to be late, but it's not our fault. It's because the supply chain, that doesn't work, right? So we've got to make sure that we're covering all of those things. So I think that when talking with suppliers, making sure that they've got backup plans for your critical items, so that you're not being held hostage, but for some, external force that you can't prepare for, they should be prepared for those things. And then we learned a lot from going through that. And we talk about it with, you're going to, what do we do and how often do we talk about it? Every week. We talk about it every week with our whole team. We're need to be customer obsessed. We need to make sure that we're coming up with solutions, that we're helping. If you're entrusting us with the business, we have to make sure that we're coming through. So we talk about it every single week with the entire sales, marketing, project managers, the shop floor, so they know exactly what it is that we're doing. They know all of our customer base. They know who they are. It's important that everybody's on board with what we're doing.
Yeah. That's a great point. That actually kind of segues us to our last point, is how, getting this good information that you've learned. And as you guys are running businesses that are now several years in the industry, how does that start to make it to, team members or others within the organization here? So just wanted to kind of close out with that a little bit, or others within the, looking a little look back before we look forward A little housekeeping just for those who might be watching now. There have been some comments and some references to some things that we took notes on for some resources. So after this, if you watch this, we're going to put a spot on our page that we might reference, that we will reference some of the materials. So you have that there on some of the things that Eric and Kevin and Matt have mentioned. So we just wanted to let you know that you don't have to be scribbling something down here as we go. So rounding out is the recommendations. This is probably one of my favorite questions here, and I'm going to roll it out a little bit here for two of these. I think there's some similarities as we go. I love having this conversation. I'm typically talking to breweries or partners who have been in business a few years, and they'll tell a story of the way they did things when their doors open. And Kevin, you kind of made reference to this, like, listen, there's 1,000 things on my list. Reading the fine print on page 12 of a CO2 contract was not there when we're trying to do our soft opening in a week kind of thing. So, but now that you've had some runtime and we're out of COVID and all these things, I'm always curious of what is that you would say to yourself 5, 6, 7 years ago when you're opening that first year, second year, and say, if I was having a beer with Kevin, 5 years ago, this is what I would say that's going to help over the next 2 or 3 years as you go along with, maybe it's 1 or 2 things around partnerships. And really where it's coming from is, a lot of people who I find engage these are brewery owners who are thinking about opening, right, in a couple of, or they have opened and they're in that first year. I again call it the hair on fire state, where they're not thinking about typically partnership engagement, right, and having those discussions. And Kevin, you kind of mentioned it too. It's like, it's not that I was hiding my forecast. I didn't have a forecast, right? So building the plane as you're flying it is another expression I hear from that first year for brewery owner. So. Matt, maybe starting with you, and for this question, kind of a two-parter of just what would you say to yourself 4 or 5 years ago, or what would you say to someone opening their doors in 6 months as it relates to partnerships?
Yeah, it does touch on a lot of things we've already talked about with regards to contracting and forecasting. I think one of the things that we did, when we first opened is, and I think I mentioned this a little earlier, is we were really sort of shopping around for best prices with lots of folks. And we wound up, let's take hops, for example. We had maybe 5 or 6 different suppliers for all different hops to save a little bit of money here or there to really try to get things down. And I think that actually made supplier relationships pretty complicated. Yeah, we might be saving a little bit of money, but we also none of the suppliers were super duper committed to us because we didn't have a lot of business with them. So, it took a few years to really figure out who we had a good relationship with and good partnership with. So I think I would just try to, again, think about it in that primary, secondary thing as I spoke about before. Maybe, try to find a couple good ones that you think you can trust, start with them, and see how that goes. If you're not happy with them, provide that feedback, and then maybe shop around. But having too many all at once could be a little bit, I think, distracting and challenging. And then just in terms of opening a brewery in 6 months or adding a second location, growing, again, I think that early forecasting and sharing that with suppliers I mentioned before is just where that's key. Is how do you expect to grow? Start to make the plans now. So when you're there, you're ready for it and they're ready for it. I think if you're not sharing that information until you're pretty much there, that's probably too late. So, I mean, I think I feel pretty strongly that a good plan is going to lead to success. So share those plans with your suppliers.
But I think that Matt asking the suppliers too, what's a realistic time frame for some of this stuff, right? That's where I think that we get caught up in. At least from a supplier's perspective, we're going to try to say yes and try to accomplish all these things. But in some instances, I can't make the paint dry any faster than the 3 days that it takes for the paint to dry. So as we're working through that stuff, if we're having that open, if you're looking to add on and you're looking to add on, start having those conversations with what's realistic timeframes. And then you're right. If you have great suppliers and they're taking care of you, the more that you're having those communication with them and putting that, it's not like you really want to always put all your eggs in one basket, but sometimes you put the eggs in that one basket and then really watch that basket instead of having it pitting all these people against each other, which probably isn't going to have the desired effect, because at some point the suppliers are going to try to make money someplace else and they probably don't have your best interests at heart. And that's where, building that trust and having those conversations about, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, here's the time frame, how can we make this work? And then really then you hold, hey, from a supplier standpoint, if they commit to a certain timeline, hold them to it. If you've committed to it, now you're going to be held to that, right? This is the way this is going to work. But because if you're having an honest conversation up front, they should be held accountable to that. And I think that that's fair.
Just as Eric was talking, I was thinking of the old thing with sort of like, good, fast, and cheap, pick 2 of the 3. You're not going to get all those. Right. Well, don't make fast your thing. If you know you're going to open a new location now, give plenty of lead time to your suppliers. So maybe hopefully you might be able to get it good or cheap. I would probably argue that, again, if you're opening a new location, make sure it's good before it's before it's the lowest possible price. But
right.
If you've got the time, don't let that be your enemy there. Share those lead times with your suppliers. Say, hey, we're going to open in 6 months, and is that going to be enough time for you? So yeah, I agree with that.
And I think cheap too. If you're looking to reduce cost, ask, how can I keep the quality level that I'm at and reduce this? Because there are ways from a supplier standpoint. We could do a buy-in. We can set this out, 6 months. We'll build them and hold them here. We can change some of the graphic, whatever that might look like. Change it on the cans, however it is that you're doing. Having that conversation, just saying, are there options for me to be able to reduce my costs? I think is a fair question to the supplier. Absolutely a fair question, because there are always alternatives. And at the end of the day, you may not come to an agreement. It might be like, nope, I want it exactly the way that it is. And maybe there isn't any cost saving, but that's a great question to ask of a supplier.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Eric. And, I want to give Kevin a chance to answer a little bit on the, either one really, for looking back, something that comes to mind from a few years ago, or something coming forward for those, opening, expanding, anything you want to touch on, Kevin, for those.
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest one, if I could turn back 5 years, was really start working on developing those secondary suppliers, those backups faster. We, because of COVID and because of shipments and supplies, like we had to substitute out some of our ingredients, so we used some imported malts that became almost impossible to get during the immediate post-COVID time. And so we had to scramble and evaluate domestic supply and see which one of these malts is going to work as a substitute in these beers. But if we had done that, prior ahead of time and had these backups, we could have been much quicker to kind of make those decisions and be confident knowing the beer is still going to taste the way we want it to. It's still going to be the same beer, but we can quickly pivot those suppliers. So if I go back pre-COVID, among many other things, that'd be one of the things that I would start doing. And I guess my advice to people that are looking to open or looking to grow in the next 6 months, first, really understand like your business and what you are designing. How are you going to go to business? What kind of products? Because that really sets the tone for the kind of conversations you should be having with suppliers. If you're going to be a brewery that is going to be releasing a new beer every week and never repeat the same beer twice, it probably doesn't make sense for you to have a year-long contract for Cascade hops or something. But it might make sense for you to explore more on the can side, because you're going to probably use the same bright cans for every one of your beers, because you're never going to get into print can numbers. You're going to always be doing shrink sleeves or labels or direct print cans or something. So, knowing that, and then really digging into the financial sides, understanding your cost of goods sold, understanding like difference between cash and profit, because that's something that people get caught up a lot in when purchasing. It might look really attractive to save 2% by buying in large quantities, but knowing what that's going to do to your cash flow before you shell out for a big purchase. Whereas it might be better, especially when you start, to eat a little bit of margin, but know you've got your cash available to you. So just understanding the financial side of your business before you open or as you're growing, I think that would be my number one piece of advice.
That is great. And I think just to end on a bonus question for you guys here is something you guys have all touched on in some form or fashion. It's something that I have seen as I relatively newer to the industry than all of you. Sometimes in our role, I feel like we're a spectator and we're watching communications between breweries and supply partners. And it was interesting that no one really talked about the idea of withholding information. If anything, sometimes, Kevin, you mentioned that you don't have it, right? You're new, you're learning. But as you guys talked, there's a theme of talking to your supplier, or sharing that. And Eric, I like how you talked, mentioned the idea of like, if you're trying to do something 6 months from now and cost is an issue, talk to us. And I feel like that is something that I do not see with early breweries. And I'll tell you the role that, Matt, you mentioned of, in a former life, having a purchasing department or procurement department where, that's their role of to spend all day, they're constantly talking to that. But to be able to have conversations of this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I budget for. This is what my business is, to your point, Kevin, that, and then that helps them go off and then try to bring a better solution. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. But I'm curious of the communication with partners, the transparency you guys all kind of mentioned of that. Is that something that started with your organizations or your time at AJS, day one, or is that part of another thing too that you would add that came as you went, as you were running the business, is more communication, more transparency as you guys have grown your organizations? And Matt, just kind of ending. We'll go from top to bottom here is the way I'm seeing it here. Matt, first question to you: Has that been part of your guys' DNA, or is that a lesson learned?
I'd say it's a lesson learned. I think it's pretty common when you first get into it. You feel like the new guy, and you're sort of like, hey, I'm not going to question what my suppliers are telling me. This is the price. Can I make that work? But again, particularly over this inflation period, and things are getting pretty tight for a lot of folks, and also trying to control our pricing to the customer too. We started asking questions. What can you do for us? Is this the best you can do? I can't hit those numbers. And like, I'd really like to work from you. Your quality's great and you're great from customer service, but I can't hit these numbers. So if you want to keep us as your customer, you got to do better. And they would. And then some folks, again, I think we're using that a little bit to their advantage and artificially raising prices, honestly, to numbers they really weren't necessary. I think that drove some of this as well too. So I totally agree that you should not be afraid to ask that question and not be afraid to use the language. Yeah, I'd like to work with you, but your price is too high. What can you do any better for me? And I think a lot of folks would be surprised that a lot of times they can. Not always, but you can't be afraid to ask the question.
I think that comes from what can be done too, right? Because if it's just, hey, can you reduce the price on the current whatever? Maybe you can, maybe you can. Maybe there's some different logistics. Maybe you buy in different bulk. But sometimes maybe you approach the problem in a different light, right? Maybe we make a whole different design, or we buy at a different time of year, or when we know that the aluminum's cheaper at this time, or hops are cheaper at that time. For us, wood's cheaper at a different time. If I know that that's going to happen and we're having that conversation, I would tell you, here's the best time to do that, so then we can lock in those prices, and this is how I'll be able to reduce that later. It's just not, we'll make less money. Let's talk about how we're going to solve this ongoing, so then we know all of the time, this is when we order our X, this is when we order our handles, this is when we order our hops. And we start figuring those things out, because the supply chain and when we purchase, it has a lot to do with where that pricing is.
Kevin, I'll round things out with you.
Yeah, I would say, I haven't probably changed. I'm, if anything, I tend to over communicate, which, can at the beginning was probably too much for people, but I think I've learned like what's important to communicate over the time. Like, what are the real things that are going to drive the conversations forward, and where can I find value talking to people, and like, what is information that can get you somewhere, to like Eric's point, like how can we figure out a better way to do it, and what is just, okay, well, cool, that's a lot of information, and here's what I can do. So I don't know. I would always be a position of, I'll talk to any supplier about anything, but I've gotten better at what I'm asking and what I'm communicating.
That is great to hear, and I appreciate you guys taking the extra bonus one here. I have been monitoring the chat room a little bit here. I want to be mindful of time. If anyone has any questions now, we can speak up, but we haven't had any during the conversation here. So what I wanted to put up here for our people viewing this, at a later date, please feel free to reach out to me with questions, and I will get you connected with Matt or Eric or Kevin if you have questions for them, and we'll get you to the right person and go from there. But I really wanted to start off first and foremost by thanking the panel, Matt, Eric, Kevin, for a good conversation and bringing your expertise in the industry and just sharing what you've learned and your thoughts on this critical issue of, partnerships and how they can, then done well, can help your business, right? And can help you grow and help you do what you're trying to do. So I really appreciate that, guys. And I appreciate the CBP for putting on this conference and their sponsors. I think this time around it's Beer Law Center, and it just really is helpful to share this with the industry. So again, thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of the day, and really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you.